So I'm going to talk about very simple stuff, childish stuff, really. So since this question came up, I think one should start with that about this terminology, right? People talk about parallel algorithms, distributed algorithms, and so on. Convention is that, for instance, if you go to our building 1 floor down or 2 floors down or further down, there are these cluster computers that are there, which are used for parallel computing by my colleagues here in physics extensively. And these are basically architectures where several things are happening in parallel, but there is a master control where you divide up the problem into component tasks, farm it out, and then collect results. So you can think of it as a chef who has many assistants. You say, you cut onions, you do this, several are doing in parallel, and then you periodically synchronize, collect things together. That's really the PRAM model that you would read about. So that's really what is normally called parallel algorithms. By distributed algorithms, people usually, so distributed is a word that signals that these are autonomous ones, lack of centralized control. Now, and as I said, concurrent is a terminology that Dijkstra suggested in the late 60s and early 70s as a way of abstracting out of both notions like parallel ones or distributed ones. Things happen concurrently with centralized control or not. So this is but all these things are changing very fast and very rapidly now. So I would say, one should not take any of this as hard and fast definitions and rules. Because when we talked about is multi-core architectures. Multi-core architectures typically, many of the things being talked about today are many different processors with one common memory. That is the picture that Kamal drew. But even as we speak, there are many architectures where each core comes with its own memory as well, right? And then there are memories that communicate. So, and then that will be closer to a distributed model. So I think one should not get too much into these things for now, because all I can say is that this thing is changing rapidly. The essence of this is things happening in parallel and communicating with each other, right? Only thing is about when you want to think about it from the perspective of algorithms. So Kamal was mostly talking about it from the perspective of programs, from programming language perspective. So you have some programming language. How do you drive all this thing? From an algorithmic perspective, there's basic algorithmic notions that we are used to. How do you think in a distributed fashion? And that's not easy if you want to do things concurrently. Okay, so let me start with the really childish example that I like. Okay, that counting, right? How far can you count on your fingers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, surely. But any more than that? Can you? Oh, 5 you can count, no? But beyond that, I know people who do like this and so on. No? So, yeah. How far can you count? Only 5? 20? Like this, right? Yeah. But how far can you go? You tell me. Up to? 20? How will you do 20? Show me.
3.
Yeah, start. What is 0? Well, okay. 0 is not there. And start with 1. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Where is 4?
4 is this.
4 is like this, is it? Okay. Yeah. And well, sign language they use, I don't know if you know sign language, right? At least the English alphabet for 26 they use. And it's a bit complicated, but you can do it, yeah. Anyway, yeah. You got up to 4 now?
5, 6, 7, 8, 10.
5, 6, 7, 8 like this. Okay.
Again 9, 10, 11, 12.
So with 4 fingers, I can see you'll go up to 15, 16, but what about this one?
17,
17,
18,
18, and then?
19, and last.
No. So I can only see 17, 18, and 19 in this. You are cheating. Okay, so this is how I would count. I'll go up to 31. Okay, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Make sure I'm not cheating, right? I'm not repeating anything. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. Right? So how did this happen? Binary. Right. Trivial. Right? Now, thing is, when I do this with children, right? Now, I can't use all this, eminent people as volunteers, but if I had school kids, primary school kids, I have 5 kids standing here, and I want to tell them that, okay, you are a little finger. Imagine one child here who's acting as little finger. Then one child here who acts as ring finger. One child here who acts as middle finger. One child who acts as index finger, and one as thumb. Now, I want to tell them that what do they need to do? Instead of my putting up fingers like this, they have to put up their hands up and down. Right? And they have to count from 0 to 31. 0 is easy. Everybody's hands are down. Now, what should each child do? What will you tell each child? Let's start with the child who's acting as little finger. What should she do? Just up and down. Right? Okay. I need some signal. Let's say that I'll whistle. Right? Some whistle or something. And every time you hear a whistle, what should you do? If it was up, you become down. If it was down, you become up. So, the little finger toggle on every tick, on every whistle. Okay. Now, what about the other fingers? Okay, so what are the numbers for which, let's see this. What are the numbers for which this finger is up? All odd numbers. It's down for all even numbers. Good. What about this one? For which numbers is it up? When does it go up first? 0, 1, 2. And then 3. 4 it's down. So, the next finger, the ring finger is going to be up for, down for 0, 1, then up for 2, 3, and then 4, 5 it's down, 6, 7 it's up, and then 10, 11, and so on. What about the middle finger? When does it come up? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is when it comes up. So middle finger will be up for 4, 5, 6, 7, and then down for 8, 9, 10, 11. Will come up again at 12. 8 plus 4 is 12, right? So 13, 14, 15, and so on. So this will be 2 down, 2 up, right? First 2 whistles you keep it down, and then you put it up, remain up for 2 whistles, down for 2 whistles, and so on. So this one is, middle finger is 4 down, 4 up. Now we get to the ring finger. Quite easy to see because first time you come up is at 8. So 0 to 7 you are down. So 8 down. Oh, this. Clearly I am confused. 8 up. And thumb is going to be down for 16. First time you come up is at 16. 0 to 15 you are down. So first 16 whistles you are down. But I think it's not fair at all. Asking little children, to, you do it. I have done it many times. You do it, you give instructions like this, the children are going to get very confused. Because if a child makes a mistake, right, you're listening to whistles and counting, right? And if one child puts up, the hand too eagerly or too late, like complete chaos after that. So not a great idea. And remember, another thing bad thing about this instruction is, you are counting up to 32, and to do that you are asking these children to count up to 16 and 8 and all that. Something is not quite right. Surely you can give simpler instructions than that. What instruction can you think of?
toggle when the lower significant one comes down.
See. Think of this finger. What does this represent? This is 8, right? When does it come up? After 7. What is 7? Like this. What does this stand for? 4. When does it come up? After 3. 3 is like this. When does this come up? At 16. Before that is 15. This is very easy, right? So now I say, little finger, hey little finger, you toggle. For anybody else, what should you do? Look to your right. Right? Look to your right. When all hands are up, what should you do? Ask them to put it down and you put your hand up. So you put your hand up. When should you put it down? You don't think about it. Somebody else will tell you. Is it clear? So the rule is, so little finger, toggle on a whistle. Everyone else, look right. When all hands are up, ask them to put it down. And put your hand up. What have you done here? Is it clear that this works? Right? So each person just this thing, and you keep your hand up until somebody to your left is going to tell you to put it down. Is the idea clear? Is it clear that it works? Okay. And children understand it immediately, no problem at all. Now what's the difference between that and this? You wanted to solve a problem of counting, right? Counting up to 32, and you did it using counting up to 16, 18 and so on. Instead there is no counting at all here, right? Now that makes sense. If you are building, what are we doing? We are talking about an n-bit counter, right? Each is one component of the counter. It doesn't make sense to build a counter and say each of this can count also, right? Shouldn't have that much memory. Now, what is the memory required for each of these fellows here? One, you are only showing your hand up and down. That's the output you are giving. And you don't have to remember a thing. What are you replacing memory by? By observation, by message passing, whatever you can call that, right? This is the heart of thinking in parallel or distributed algorithms. You want to replace local computation by communication. The trade-off is always between computation and communication. This little cute example, you can get rid of all computation and replace it all by communication. But that's really the trade-off that you want to explore. How much I can compute locally and communicate, right? And here, I have said something like this here. When all hands are up, that means I'm assuming some connectivity. What is that? I'm assuming that, well, hands are connected. Children are connected because they're seeing each other. But if you were to think in terms of processes and processors, what you are saying is that the little finger need not see anything. Other fingers see all processes to the right. So to the right, already says there is some directionality. I'm connecting them in sequence and everyone can see all the rest. So this is the second point that is a critical difference when you move to distributed algorithms. There is an underlying graph of connectivity, right? The connectivity is critical in the whole discussion. So in general, when you say a distributed system, you are talking about processes connected in some particular fashion. There is some underlying graph. And that's a very critical thing in this whole business. I think I was mentioning it in my lectures and games and distributed systems and so on, that this is one critical departure that we forget. What is a normal computational model of an algorithm? An input is presented to you, right? How is the input presented to you? Maybe as a sequence. You take each component, finding the maximum of n numbers What do? Well, you assume that it's presented to you as an array, right? You compare elements and proceed. So in a distributed system, in general, you can't make such assumptions, right? Input may be coming in different ways. First, the input comes from other processors. This is very important, right? You have some external input and you also have communications. And the underlying graph of connectivity is very critical. So immediately you should ask here, do I need this much connectivity? Should each finger, each process be able to see everyone to the right? Certainly not. So what should I do to improve this? Yes? Previous right. Yeah, but then tell me the rule, no? I have to change the rule. Well, look at our friend here, 8, right? When does 8 go up? Look, so in terms of only what is happening to the middle finger, what should I do? When I am down and I have to go up, okay, and then I said I asked to put up, not quite right. What should I do? Let's start with little finger. Just watch once again and see if you get the idea. 0, 1, 2. When this goes up, what has happened to this fellow? It's going down. Okay. 3, 4. When this went up, what happened to the one to the right? It went down. Okay. There seems to be one rule that whenever person immediately to my right is going down, I go up or toggle. There is a difference, right? It may not be going up. Okay. So this is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So is it clear that, so when do I toggle in general? When the one immediately to the right is going down, I toggle. That's it. And we have taken care of this one when it goes down, right? So please do it yourself. Write down this bit string 0000 to 1111 and see what happens, right? You will see that I can replace it by this local decision, namely, and this is something again dear to distributed algorithms. In general, you have a graph of connectivity and you would want to assume that all you need to see is only your adjacent processes. If you can come up with an algorithm where all your decisions are based on what you see in the immediate vicinity, in some bounded neighborhood, that's considered a good algorithm because you don't know how big the graph is going to be, and in general you want to make local decisions. So this is one important decision. And this is, that's why I said, parallel algorithms also, it's of that kind, hypercube structures and all. You will see in general, you want to communicate only with your neighbors. So that the trade-off is now, first, trade-off is between computation and communication and connectivity. You would like to do all your communication based on as much local information as possible. You don't want information to necessarily having to travel from one end of the graph to another end of the graph. It should not depend on that as much as possible, right? And then in the literature you will find a so-called class of wave algorithms. I don't have time and I'm not going to go into this. This is only to refer to. Leslie Lamport has developed some very, very interesting wave algorithms. So these are considered wave algorithms where every process always communicates only with its neighbors. But the influence spreads you can think of like a wave, right? So information going from one end of the network to another proceeds in a sequence of waves, and then you compute how much you need, etc., etc. So I'm not going to go further on this counting example. This is to give you an idea of how one thinks about these things, right? Is the idea clear? And you see that the basic idea, the basic thing like we are talking about, like counting, for instance, already looks different when you start thinking in this, mode of where things can happen concurrently. And of course, this is completely sequential. That's also something one must realize, that even though processes can operate concurrently, they are, sequentialized by my algorithm, right? And you want it because you want an n-bit counter which proceeds sequentially. Fine. But in general, part of the idea is also to allow as much concurrency as possible, not make processes wait for each other. Here is one where they have a centralized control. What is the centralized control here? The whistle, right? There is a clock ticking, right? When do I take any action? When I hear a whistle, right? And that whistle is common to everybody. So there is one physical clock that's synchronizing all the activities. Okay. Now, that again may not be in general the case. And you would like to design algorithms where you don't want to assume that there is one single clock. Unfortunately, I'm not going to go into that kind of thing at all because that's much more complicated for today's purposes. So let me start with something that's the most routine thing that we do.
The common clock is counting under
Oh, by the way, that's an exercise. That's an exercise to think about for this particular one, right? Think of these children not as sitting in one room, but equipped with today's mobiles, right? So, I should act out in my room, but somehow together we should act out an n-bit counter, right? So, the only one who will operate autonomously is the one acting as little finger. But notice that what is the modification that we did that I have to see? I have to look at my right neighbor, right? And I have to see when her hand is going down, and then I toggle my state. This is what I said. That means what? I need to get a message from that person saying, hey, I have just put my hand down. And then I toggle, right? And when I'm toggling, if I'm putting my hand up, I don't have to say anything. But when I'm toggling, if my hand is going down, what should I do? I should send a message to somebody who is my left neighbor. So it doesn't matter where those persons are. As long as I know who is my right neighbor, who is my left neighbor, what is the URL or whatever, I can send a message. Right? That's all. So you can give a message passing implementation for this, eliminate the global clock. Is that clear? Suresh, does that answer the question? It doesn't. Okay. Yeah.
No, because messages have to be sent. I mean, so for instance, when the day goes down that day.
No. So the protocol for each of the guys equipped to the mobile, you wait for a message, then only you act. Except for the endpoint, the one.
No, the point is that suppose the little finger, ring finger, and ring finger go down.
Yeah.
Okay, then there are 3 messages that have to be passed.
Yeah.
And depending on when they are passed, I mean, the index finger has to come up, but the little finger might also come up at the same time.
Exactly. So this is the critical thing about, as far as the messages are concerned, what kind of behavior you are assuming, right? Oh, this is the kind of details that you have to get into, and now you can see how far Kamal's stuff, comes, right? Thing is, when I'm saying a message is sent, if 2 messages are sent, they should be delivered in the order in which they were sent. That's important. And there must be some way of timestamping or some way of comparing different things that come. Then you can ask, hey, but isn't that a global clock again, right? Okay, so that is called the problem of clock synchronization. You can assume that they are all working on local clocks, but you have to synchronize clocks somehow. So many of the results that you can prove in the message passing model very often are up to clock synchronization. But let's assume that there is one IST or Greenwich time that you can use, and use that to disambiguate messages sent at different times. If you do that, actually you can get a fairly simple thing. But you can go further also, but that's much harder. Okay, but as I said, that's the kind of complication that I don't want to get into. This is to really give you a flavor of what I call the kind of thinking that goes into algorithms of this kind. That's all I'm trying to do. Okay, so what is the most basic problem that we begin our algorithms 101 with, right? What I always say, by now you know me, right? What is that? That, okay, that's some big name. As far as I am concerned, finding the maximum of n numbers, right? Come on. Finding the maximum of n numbers is what you begin algorithms with, right? You are given n numbers, and they're laid out to you. You take the first one, call it the maximum, and then on your mother's knee you learn that, you compare adjacent ones. By the time you have done n minus 1 comparisons, you get the maximum. And n minus 1 comparisons are necessary. That's a lower bound and upper bound, and then you say okay. And then we talk about sorting and all that after that, right? Because this is like first step. Question is, how do you do it in a distributed world? If there are n processes, each holding on to one number, how are you going to find the maximum? You meaning who? Who finds the maximum? There are n processes, right? Process 1 has a value x1, process 2 has x2, and so on. For, convenience, I'll assume that we are working with where all the numbers are distinct. Okay? Which is also a deadly assumption. How do you know they are distinct? But, okay, I know, right? Fine. But they're all there. Somehow you want to find the maximum. Again, since there is no you sitting out there, that means that all the processes have to find the maximum. Right? Isn't that a reasonable thing to say? Because you don't know who, right? You can say that whoever is the maximum should know that at the end of the algorithm, I am the maximum. That's a great thing to do, but what about the others who are all deluding themselves thinking that they are the maximum, right? Doesn't help. So, the only way to define the problem is to say that there are these n processes sitting there who have values x1, x2, xn, and they have to do some communication, and at the end of the algorithm, all the processes should have the value which is the maximum. How do you solve this problem? Once again, the underlying connectivity comes to play, right? Because you have to exchange messages, give information locally to others, so you have to find out something. So let me take again the simplest example. So once again, how do you do these things? The standard one that is assumed is assume that they are connected in a ring. And I have made it a directed graph. So there is a notion of who is my left neighbor and who is my right neighbor. If this is what is given, how will you solve the problem? What does process I do? Processes are sitting at the nodes and the edges represent how they can communicate, right? An edge from here to here means that a process will send a message to the one which is I plus 1. Okay, so what does process I do? Yes? Yeah.
X1 will send X2 X number.
Yeah.
Now X2 will check, and if X2 is big, X2 will say to the next person that I am the big guy here.
Right.
In that way, so finally every processor will know who is the...
Very good. Only thing is, the fact that you said we start with x1 will send to x2, how would x1 know that it's 1 to start? Already, does it mean that they all know who is the minimum? Right?
X1 has the number, X1 has the name X1.
But x1 knows its own name, but others also think I am the person to start, right? So it's not quite like that, right? So really the point is anybody can start. Because there is a symmetry in the problem, unless you break the symmetry in some fashion, you have to assume that really anybody can start. So process I, suppose it decides to start. What should it do? It has no basis for comparison with anybody else, right? It says, hey, I am the maximum, and sends it to I plus 1. Now, process I plus 1 gets a number from its left, right? Now, what can it do? Now it has two numbers. It can compare. It can compare the alleged maximum with whatever is locally there. If the alleged maximum happens to be smaller, what should it do? It should just drop it. Right? Eat that, swallow the message. Nothing to do. If the alleged maximum happened to be bigger than whatever I am, yes, then I am a decent person. I forward it to whom? The next one, I plus 2. Right? So in general, what does process I do? Process I, if it's just waking up from sleep, right, and decides to find the maximum, what it will do is to say, claim I am the maximum and send it to I plus 1. Right? Is it clear? On the other hand, if it gets a message from I minus 1, what should it do? Compare with my local value. If that my local value is indeed bigger, I just swallow the message. I do nothing. Because presumably at some point, or you can say at this point itself, I wake up and say that I am the maximum and forward it. Right? Otherwise, whatever was the received one, I'll forward it. Is the idea clear? Should I write down all these things?
No.
I think, yeah. And if when this keeps happening, what will happen at some point? If I send messages to my right, if I ever get a message from my left having my own value, I know I am the maximum. Right? That means what it is actually? A value that has gone around the ring fully once should be the maximum. Uncontested hero. Right? So at that point I can declare myself to be the maximum. But then I have to tell everybody else. Right? At this point the maximum value should go once more around the ring. Is that clear? You can't eliminate that. You have to go around once more. Fine. So how many messages got sent in this? 2n? N squared? Why n squared?
No, 2n minus
2n minus 1? That's even better. Huh? Well, that n is, we said once the maximum is found, it has to go around the ring one. So an extra n messages you do need. Right? Okay, so that n we keep separate. First, finding the maximum. Yeah? What is the worst case you can think of that you should think about, no? Right. We said, I arbitrarily said, nice clockwise pradakshina, right? And if the values happen to be, given to you anti-clockwise, you are, nicely ordered. Then what happens? Process I will send I messages. Is it clear? In the worst case, process I will send I messages. Worst case. Sends I messages. Therefore, the total number of messages is I, that is order n squared. So, once you have order n squared, that extra n is small change. Let's not worry about it. Right? So, can you do better than that? We'll assume the same connectivity, same kind of connections and how they talk to each other, but can one do better than that?
Is there some reason you don't want to break this symmetry and have each person do exactly the same thing? If you have somebody who you know is going to be the start, then you don't need.
I erased that, I shouldn't have. This is ground rules. And, okay, since he has asked, why is this a golden rule? Why do I want to not, elect our dynamic leader and
No, but then what about
ask her to?
In that example, in the way that was special, as compared to the rest of the.
In fact, that is why I would say, in the convention I was talking about parallel and distributed, right? That was parallel, right? There is one, the great leader who is blowing the whistle, right? And everybody is acting according to her whistle, right? And Tamil Nadu, we know how that works, right? So, whereas this is, godless, so it's completely distributed. Right? No, but why do you want something like this? Why should you take it so critically? And obviously, come on, one process, everybody sends the value once, and that person finds, good old finding a maximum, n minus 1 comparisons, sends it back, tells everyone. Why not do that? So here is the leader. Yeah? Yeah? Why not do that? Well, the reason is why you think about this at all. One very important reason is fault tolerance or failure tolerance. That's the correct term. The whole reason for going to distributed systems and computing at all is because if something fails, the rest of the system should proceed smoothly. And this becomes a weak link. If that fails, the whole thing collapses. That's one important reason. So process failures is something that's taken very seriously in this whole thing. Another is simply because it's given to you, like internet, right? Geographically, these are systems that are there and they are autonomous. So here, that's one, you can't tell them what to do, right? If you're looking at internet protocols and so on, right, TCP/IP, how it works, things just come at will and join and leave, right? And they're geographically separated, they are distant machines. You can't have centralized control. Who's going to follow? You can't. It has to be something agreed on by all parties who will, join at will and leave at will. So it could be simply geographical or whatever necessity. And another very important thing which Dijkstra talked about, which I think is important, so let me mention that, is timescales. To me, this is one of the most persuasive reason for thinking about distributed algorithms at all. And as I said, this is really Dijkstra and Lamport. And mainly because you are talking about processes that can run on completely different time scales, right? Human beings giving input operate in seconds, right? Printers printing things operate in maybe milliseconds. Memory transfer operating in microseconds. Registers operating in nanoseconds. So by the time you hunt one key and press, the CPU could be doing billions of calculations. It doesn't make sense to think of, just because we have abstract pictures like this, right? Don't think that they are all operating on the same time scale, right? These are abstract pictures, and that's how we should do algorithms. When you're designing algorithms, you shouldn't be sitting and thinking, oh, that's a printer process, and this is a memory transfer, and so on and so forth. Just think of them as processes, threads, right? And really, this is one of the tremendous insights of Dijkstra that led to the early operating systems that could do all this multiprogramming, right? The THE multiprogramming system, Ben Eindhoven was the one built on this kind of insight. I say that I'll do all my development assuming they're just processes operating concurrently. So don't think about timescales at all. That's a very liberating thing. And you can start thinking about how things will go. And then you only look at how messages are sent when, the kind of question that Suresh raised earlier about what if they come at completely different times, how will they synchronize? Yes, those are important questions to discuss. But the main point is that you can reinvent your familiar theory in this model as well. And it has proved to be extremely important and useful. I mean, internet is perhaps the biggest gift computer science has given to the world, right? Not the problem solver, the Turing machine, which computes things. That's very important. But really, internet is the, tremendously flexible mechanism where, modes of communication are not what you could have dreamt of. And this is my cue to mention that today is Turing's birthday. Turing centenary. And last month in Cambridge there was a Turing centenary conference, and somebody was saying that if Turing would have been really proud of something that humanity got from computing, it would be the internet. And Turing's great papers, one is this model of a Turing machine, and the other one is of what is called the Turing test. And most people compare and say what is the deep one and so on. But certainly Turing had this idea of computers communicating with each other, human beings communicating with computers, and all these, and how that in itself is a kind of embodiment of human intelligence. Okay, this is something that Turing was thinking of. Anyway, so today's program is quite apt in my opinion. And also we are planning to have, among this Golden Jubilee lectures, one day devoted to the life of Alan Turing and his work. Most likely in August, sometime middle of August we'll have one, and you'll get information on that. Okay, so let's get back to this model and then ask, how can you do better than this? One thing is that what is clear is this is the problem, right? You're making process I send I messages. Can you fix this somehow, right? And make it all messages travel to one fixed neighborhood. So for this, I'm going to move to a bidirectional ring. So that means it's an undirected graph and or bidirectional, so messages can travel in both directions. So let's assume that what we have is a bidirectional ring, and it's an exercise for you later to see how you would do it for a directional ring, directed ring as well. So what each process does is, let's fix a neighborhood. So this is a K neighborhood. For each process. Okay, K on this side and K on this side. So K neighborhood has 2K plus 1 processors. Okay. And what does, and this is a very typical solution that's provided and almost like a paradigm way of thinking, right? When you have something you want to improve, what you do is fix in neighborhoods, and things always happen. You know, everybody is always operating within their neighborhoods, and you expand the neighborhood as you go along. This is the idea. So what a process does is, when it decides to do something, it sends whatever its value to its neighborhood, right? So take the first case, one neighborhood. What does that mean? I tell my value to my right neighbor and to my left neighbor. And then what do? They check, they do the comparison, and if one of them is bigger, what will they do? They send it back to me, right? If it turns out that both of them say it's okay, I announce that I am the local leader, local thug, right? So it's all by deciding. So and then the thing moves to the next phase. In the next phase, I already know that I am the leader in a 2 neighborhood. Then I go to the next neighborhood, 2 on each side. Among the 5, I am the leader. It keeps happening like that. Is the idea clear? Now what will happen? In general, so let me see. Actually, not 2K. I'll go for, yeah, okay. Let it be. How many neighborhoods like that should I look for? What do you see what I'm trying to do?
Powers of 2.
Powers of 2. Powers of 2 is what I want to do, right? Yeah. So if n is, let's say, order 2 power L, right? N equal to 2 power L without thinking about it. So I want to look at that many faces, L faces, right? So how should I do this? Any? Yeah? So 2K, if I have only K, what are the kind of values of K that I want to work with? In the Lth phase, what should be K? Am I hearing something? Shreya is saying, yeah. 2 raised to the L. This is what I want. In the Lth phase, K equals 2 power L. This is all I need. Because then what will happen? I'll start with what is the first phase, right? 0th phase, if you like. 0th phase, I send it to both my neighbors, and at any point of time, I'm sending it to 2 power L processors on each side. Find the maximum. Whoever is the maximum will move to the L plus 1th phase, right? Whoever is the local leader will move to the L plus 1th phase.
Log n.
You keep doing this. How long do you have to do this?
Log n.
Log n, right? So how many phases? order log n phases. Okay. Now in each phase, how many messages are sent? To elect a local leader, maybe I don't need this anymore, I can use this. To elect a local leader, in the elth phase, how many messages are sent? 4 times 2 to the L. 2 to the L in this direction, it has to come back. 2 to the L in this direction, come back. Right? 4 times 2 to the L messages get sent. Messages. How many local leaders are there in the Lth phase? Remember, at the same time it's happening all over the place. We are really exploiting the concurrency here, right? Remember in the first phase when we are starting, everybody is comparing with their neighbors all around the ring, right? So how many are there? Think about it this way. Between 2 leaders, how many non-leaders must be there? Between any 2 leaders, right? Between any 2 leaders, between any 2 local leaders,
2 came.
2 to the, that's case L,
Yeah.
2 to the L. So, yeah. Between any 2 local leaders, there must be 2 to the L minus 1 non-leaders. Surely. Right? Between any 2 leaders, there must be 2 to the L minus 1 non-leaders they must be separated that way. So total number of local leaders in the Lth phase will be n over 2 to the L minus 1. Oh no, 2 to the L minus 1, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now you can see how many you need, right? We have already seen that each time you are sending 4 times 2 to the L messages, right? And so how many of them are sending messages? So you will get 4n. There is a factor of 2, and so 8n, right? So the total number of messages that we are talking about is 8n log n. So it's order n log n. With order n log n messages, you can actually find the maximum, and then you need another n messages to announce the maximum to everybody. That's again small change that you can add. Now this is not the best you can do. I think some 1.27 n log n is, I think, the known upper bound. So some such thing. I don't know precisely. And I don't know what is the latest on this and so on. So this one is already about at least 8 years old or sometime around. Okay. Not much time, but let me try to say how you would do something. What about the lower bound? Right. Okay. So as I said, I have given this idea for a bidirectional ring. Think about how you will do it for when you can't communicate on both sides. You can still get an order n log n algorithm, and that's a nice exercise to think about. Okay. Now, how do you prove lower bounds on something like this? Right. I'd like to show that this is in fact, n log n is in fact a lower bound. So I want an omega n log n. I want to force this algorithm to send omega n log n messages. Any algorithm for doing this. Okay. So again, to give you a flavor of the argument, how does that go? What I do is basically any ring that you take. Okay, so I'll assume a ring that's so it's called non-uniform. It's a bidirectional ring. Non-uniform in the sense that processes no n. This is another important thing that you will find in the analysis of distributed algorithms, how much each process knows about the entire graph. The knowledge of a process about the global system is something that's an important criteria. It's not necessary in this algorithm that we talked about here, right? Do processes need to know the value of n? Not at all, right? It's a ring, so you just wait for something that goes to my right to come back from my left, right? So you don't need to know n at all. So such an algorithm is called a uniform algorithm. A uniform algorithm is another prized one you would like to work with. And remember, I am talking about a very, very simple graph here, namely the ring. Okay, another exercise is to think about how you would do something like this for an arbitrary graph given to you, right? Where you communicate with your neighbors and somehow it doesn't follow here. It doesn't follow. You have to do it separately. Okay, so the way you do it is that you split it into half. Think of it as two rings of size n by 2. And what you do is you say that, okay, if the number of messages is for a ring of size k is m of k, right? What you argue is that each of this then therefore you will be sending twice m of k messages, and then you must add at least k minus 1 by 2 messages. To communicate between these two, when you put it together, you argue that you must send some order k minus 1 by 2 messages. In which case, the recurrence is very straightforward. You will get n log n because, you know, m of 2 is greater than 1. Why is that? Suppose there is a ring of size 2. That means there are only 2 processors, right? Then each should know who is the maximum, right? So P1 must send a message to P2. P2 must send a message to P1. So you need 2 messages, right? M of 2 is at least 2, right? And that's basically the idea that you want to make use of. So M of 2 is this one, and what you are saying is that M of n is greater than or equal to twice n 2 plus n minus 1 by 2. And that gives you order n log n. So this is a critical argument. How will you argue that? The way you do it, as I said first, it's the same argument effectively here. Look at all the processes here P and all the processes here Q. So everyone in P must know, supposing the leader is from Q, right? The maximum value is in Q, right? The maximum is sitting somewhere here, and somehow all the processes here must know who is the leader, right? So if I take 2 rings of size n by 2 and connect them up to, so let's say that this is E1, this is an edge E1, and this is an edge E2. Now what we are doing is to break this and connect them up as some E1 prime and E2 prime here. This is what we are doing, right? What you want to argue is that messages, at least k by 2 messages must go from here to here, or k by 2 messages must come from here to here, right? The only problem is that if you pre-decide which edge, right, your adversary may force things to go on the other. So that's why you want to make sure that this is done a little carefully. Now that part is a little subtle, you know. I can't do through hand waving. I mean, because with hand waving I can even argue what I just said anyway, which is actually wrong. So there is a formal analysis that is done, and here what you do is you take sequences of executions, and then you argue that I consider all executions that happen here using only this part. Let me call that some sequence alpha 1. Take some sequence here that of executions that messages that happen here, call it alpha 2. Already I am making sure that twice mk messages are here. Now consider any completed execution of the algorithm, because we don't know what the algorithm is, right? You're asking, take any algorithm, take any completed execution, say some alpha 3, and then you say that I should be able to go to a prefix of this execution where I'm not sending any messages at all, right? So that's some alpha 2, alpha 3, alpha prime that you come up with. Now you sit and argue what you're going to do, right? Look at all, you can say that now there is an extension of this where no messages sent on this at all, no messages sent on this at all. Start from there and now schedule the execution. Say that there is at least one execution where the processes here are contiguous, the processes here are contiguous, and let's say, without loss of generality, the leader is here. That means that inductively, whatever are we are talking about at the kth stage, that at least half of the messages must travel across one particular edge. There is an execution where I can schedule this. If that is so, in the worst case, that algorithm will take this many messages. This is the kind of thing. Normally, doing a lower bound proof of this is like one lecture. I mean, it will take, a lot of little lemmas to be proved, and you can establish that lower bound of this kind can be done. Now, this was to show you that if you take something as simple as finding the maximum of n numbers, there is a distributed version of that, and a distributed version of that you can do very familiar analysis. You can do a trivial upper bound like order n squared, slightly more thought, an improved upper bound like order n log n, and a matching lower bound omega n log n. You can do all this. You can actually carry this kind of analysis forward. For instance, I give you the graph and I want to find a minimum weight spanning tree, right? How do you do it in this distributed world, right? You're given the graph, processes are sitting at nodes. Now, between themselves, they want to compute a minimum spanning tree. At the end of the algorithm, each process should have a copy of the MST at its node for the entire graph. Again, what is the connectivity based on that you can do, and there are some very nice algorithms. You can do upper bounds and lower bounds of these. You are given a graph, there are all these n numbers, you want to sort it, right? We talked about finding the maximum and minimum. So I'm trying to argue to show you mainly that in the familiar world of algorithms, all the algorithmic problems that we know of, you can start thinking in these terms. Some of them are easy, many of them turn out to be really hard. Like for instance, what I said about MST, finding a cycle in a graph, checking whether a graph is bipartite, there's, nice algorithms that you learn in 101. You can start, what is BFS? How will this, distributed system together run a BFS on my graph, right? How do you do it? Well, there is an algorithm for that. So, this is really a semester's job, not something that you can do easily. And turns out that many of this analysis is really, really tricky and very simple problems, and many of these lower bounds are not known. I mean, it's an area with lots of open problems. Then comes more interesting ones like randomized algorithms, right? Randomization, once again, distributed randomized algorithms, I'll say, is really where the action is, because they're really tricky and, a lot of open problems there. So let me end with one remark. When you want to move to distributed systems like the internet, okay, there is another dimension that comes in, and that's, to me, is something very interesting, namely that after all, the paradigm that we are thinking of is that an algorithm designer says this is what you should do, and all the processes sitting at nodes are nice, well-behaved algorithms which do exactly what the designer tells them to do. If we are thinking of things like the internet that I was talking about, right, these are so-called protocols where, processes are in computers, autonomous computers, and all communication is managed using some communication protocols. It's no longer the case that you can assume that everyone will follow the protocol. So another model that is considered is one where each of these processes have their own private objectives. They have certain goals. They'll follow the protocol, follow what the algorithm designer says, only up to a point. If it gets me, good behavior. Otherwise, I don't. Well, oh, by the way, one of the basic ones and extremely interesting one is connectivity. I have this graph. There is node S, there is node T. I want to find the shortest path from S to T. In a distributed algorithm, it's extremely interesting. Now you can say that, well, supposing you were trying to do this on the network, for instance, on the internet, right? How are these things done? Packets are forwarded using routers and so on. Now, that assumes a model where every process is willing to forward a packet from some unknown source to some unknown destination. For what reason? Strictly being altruistic, being a nice person, etc. You can't assume such things, right? Now, so one model is to say that take the same problem, same development, all these things, but also allow these processes to be selfish. The maximum problem, for instance, become one where all these processes have these values x1, x2, etc., but they may lie about their values. Because, for instance, there is a reason for finding the maximum, no? In algorithms, you never think about what is the goal of the algorithm, right? The goal of the algorithm, find the MST, find the maximum, compute the shortest path. Usually there is for a reason, and the participants in the algorithm know the reason. Can they exploit that, right? Now, as I said, Nissan takes this lovely example of where the maximum is computed so that a service is provided. Then I lie, I say my value is high. So you can come up with a mechanism by which processes not only do this but get a payoff or have to pay the algorithm something, and then you can try to change this. And then it becomes game theoretic. Okay. Many of the problems that we can talk about, again, this development you can do, but finding the maximum is something, it becomes a dominant strategy equilibrium. Finding a maximum independent set, there you get a Nash equilibrium. Finding MST, you're talking about something which is a conditional equilibrium, and so on and so forth. So there is a very nice development that you can do. Start with algorithms that we learn, but as distributed algorithms. Over the last 25 years or so, there is a body of literature that has developed, which gives part of the core that we talk about, quite a lot waiting to be explored. Then the other recent development of looking at it in models of selfish agents, where even that is still dark. When we know only a handful of algorithms of that kind, largely we don't know how the entire development would go. That's it. Thank you.
Why do we take ring as a representative for solving all these problems?
Okay, so it's a very good question. You have to assume some connectivity, right? Now, so first you have to assume that it's a connected graph. Most of these things, if the graph is not connected, you have a problem. So you have to assume it's a connected graph anyway. It's a bit like finding the MST, right? Minimum spanning tree of the graph. Or in many algorithms, distributed algorithms, somehow you want the information to reach everybody in the network, right? So it's not that you assume that there is a physical connectivity, which is a ring, right? The physical connectivity will be a graph. What you will do is to come up with some ring connecting all the processes. It's a kind of a logical connectivity that you come up with and use that to solve the problem. Because you know that many things can be solved that way. So ring is one, when you can do it, is what. In fact, quite a bit of database transactions which involve many processes. And by the way, this ring will not be for the entire graph anyway. It will be for some subset of nodes which have to compute something together. First, you compute a ring on them and use that to solve the problem. So these are virtual links that you set up and communicate on that virtual link. That's the idea. So ring is one thing that normally people work with. Star networks. Star again, not because you have a star available, but first you come up with a kind of a logical star that on your graph and then communicate on those links. So, anything else?
Any other questions?
And there are also failure tolerance notions of these things.
Oh yes, of course. I put it down. So how much? So that's a very important. So what are the parameters that you study in this whole thing? One is number of messages. I, talked about synchronous processes. These are synchronous rings, so the number of rounds of communication you can talk about. Time complexity you talk about, but message complexity is this thing, because the big trade-off that you are looking for is computation versus communication. How much you want to do. You want to do as little as possible locally and transfer it all into communications. The other parameter that's very critical is failure, right? How much failure can my algorithm take, right? Can I come up with one, so the notion is of K resilience. You want to say that my algorithm will work as long as at most K processes fail. Now K then, given N, what is it? Now of course it's going to be some fraction of N. So agreement problems, typically you show that if 1/3 of the processes fail, you can't do anything. So strictly greater than, the number of failing processes must be strictly less than 1/3. And then you can show that tolerant algorithms exist. Then, so that's one parameter. Another is if you have reliable digital signatures, processes, IDs cannot be forged. See, the moment you can start thinking of failed processes or malicious processes, you can think of lying as well. So use that, how much is available. So different kind of resources that are looked at for this. Yeah. But failure is one. So both node failures and edge failures, both are critical. So some node collapses, its entire neighborhood is gone. And then you have to find some other way of rerouting things. And edge failures is usually easier to work with, except in the asynchronous mode. In the asynchronous world, edge failures are the most deadly ones. So, well, there are these books by Nancy Lynch. Not a great book, but I'm recording this. But, yeah, I hope you will edit this out, right? Yeah, but it's there, and it's a tome. It's something that there is also a book by Gerard Tell, and there are a few, but Barbosa. Peleg is a little better, but they're all better for different things. So unfortunately, that's the situation.
Can other topologies can be mapped to ring, for example, hypercube, so that you can form a ring there?
You can, but it's usually pointless because the algorithms that exploit the structure of the hypercube, are so structure dependent that when you do this, you lose all the flavor of these. So this works in the distributed case. I mean, when you have a hypercube architecture, which you can have on your board stacked up like downstairs, it's best to use that, and you get much better results. Okay, thank you.